Who was at Sev's talk presentation earlier today? Yeah, a lot of you? It was so amazing, wasn't it? Well, we have another amazing presenter coming up. My name is Alicia. I'm with McMenamins History Department, and I just have a few things to tell you about. So tomorrow, we have the costume contest, which starts at noon at the Hotel Oregon tent. However, if you're going to participate, register at 10 o'clock. And then in the afternoon, the big UFO Festival Parade starts at 3:30. There's lots of other fun events happening as well. You can find the whole schedule on ufofest.com. However, right now I would like to introduce ufologist James Clarkson to give you a few words of wisdom. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to go deeper into the UFO mystery. I just want to say a couple things first. Number one, you will notice that I use UFO, not UAP. No UAP habla here. Occasionally, you'll even hear me say flying saucer, because that's cool too. There is a man who is here in spirit that was actually here at McMinnville many times, a truly loved ufologist, Stanton Friedman. And I will tell you the number one thing that I learned from Stanton that I never forget: don't be an apologist ufologist. Be proud. We know we're right. We will not give up. We will not surrender. And we're not going back where we were. We can't bring you a live alien or a flying saucer. I wish I could. But what's the next best thing? The next best thing is if you get to hear from somebody who has a collection of really good UFO stories and accounts that take you deeper into the UFO mystery. That would be Earl Grey Anderson this evening. Earl Grey Anderson is MUFON's State Director of Southern California, an executive member of MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team, and a member of MUFON's Rapid Response STAR Team. Earl hosted both Experiencer workshops at last year's MUFON Symposium in Denver, Colorado, and he will be hosting the same events at this year's MUFON Symposium in Ohio. Earl has personally investigated over 900 UFO reports and specializes in experiencer and high strangeness cases. He has appeared on multiple radio shows, podcasts, and TV shows, such as Unidentified with Demi Lovato, the Travel Channel's Storming Area 51 special, and the season finale of Motor Trend Television's Motor Mythbusters, Cars versus UFOs. I wished I would have seen that. I'd like to see a car go up against a UFO. Earl recently represented MUFON's Experiencer Resource Team and shared his own anomalous experience of extraterrestrial contact on the History Channel's most viewed show, Ancient Aliens. Earl teaches an accredited course in ufology titled UFOs and Other Worlds at Los Angeles Otis College of Art and Design. Earl is also known as a published singer, songwriter, and lead guitarist with 3 CDs under his belt. Earl dotes on his 3 children and 3 grandchildren and lives happily with his wife Lisa and his cat Thor. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Earl Grey Anderson.
What a wonderful festival, huh? My gosh. This is the first time I've been here, and my wife and I have just had a blast. It's been wonderful and just so meaningful. But anyway, I'm going to get rolling here. let's see if we're working here. Yeah, that's me. That's my title. You don't need to hear that again. But anyway, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I got here. My origin story actually starts with my mother. My mom is probably the reason why I'm sitting up here talking with you guys. Here we go. So, my mom used to tell this one strange story that she called her ball lightning incident. When she was 16 years old, my mom lived in Muscatine, Iowa, watermelon center of the world, capital of the world, I guess. But it was one hot summer, I believe it was in the 1930s, late 30s, and my mom was 16, 17 years old. They used to sleep on the screened-in porch because it would get so hot and humid during the summer. And, well, here I go. It's kind of hot and hot up here, too. But anyway, her sister was about 10 years old, I think. Mom was about 16. And so her sister was already asleep on the porch. My mom was getting ready to fall asleep. She had like a little bedroll made up there. And she heard this weird buzzing sound. Well, she looked around, and it was about the size of a beach ball. And she said that it was this ball of sparks. I think of it as a Foo Fighter. I mean, it's the right period of time. It's right before World War II. A lot of B-17 pilots and people in the Army Air Corps described similar objects. But it was like the size of a beach ball, and it was made out of sparks. And she said that this thing was buzzing like a hive of angry bees. So she's intrigued, She watched this thing push its way through the screen. Went over to where her sister was sleeping, and it just hovered there for a little while, as though it were observing her. Then it came over to where my mom was. Mom said that it came up to her eye level. She was sort of semi-recumbent on her elbows, and it was sort of eye to eye with her. If this thing had eyes, it didn't. It was just a ball of sparks under intelligent control. Now, she always referred to this as ball lightning, but I've spoken with, Dr. Irena Scott. You may be familiar with Dr. Irena McMenamins Scott. She's a good friend of mine, a scientist, PhD, and she said, ball lightning only lasts 3 seconds max. 3, maybe 5 seconds. This thing, it was retaining its shape, its form. It was right in front of my mom, and then it went back to the screen and it pushed its way back through. My mom, she said that she was very, very intrigued. She thought it was ball lightning. She got up, she went through the door, and she followed this thing. It had been moving maybe 20 feet in the air. And she followed this out to the neighbor's adjacent cornfield to where they lived. And she said that she got right under it, and it was maybe 30 feet above her, just waiting for her. It was just waiting for her to arrive. And so anyway, she's looking at this thing, and she said that it suddenly popped, and it popped like a soap bubble. And she said, it smelled sort of like your electric train transformer, Earl, which is ozone, electricity. But it wasn't ball lightning. This thing was observing her sister. And that was the first really strange story that she told me. But she had another strange story that she told me. Now, my mom, it wasn't any news to the family. My mom was one of Howard Hughes's personal secretaries. She worked over at the Sepulveda Hughes aircraft office. And she worked there between 1955 and when I was born, 1958. So let's see here. That's another picture of my mom, and you saw that's my mom and myself. So she told this very strange story about working for Howard Hughes. Let's see here. There we go. I got ahead of my slides already. So my mom, it was like I was 5 years old, and I remember we were living in Venice, California. We had kind of a cheery yellow kitchen. And, you know, I went down to have breakfast, and my mom started talking to me, but it was weird. It really got my attention because she was speaking to me like I was another adult. I think that she had this story on her mind. She thought about it, and it was something that she couldn't tell people. She said that she had worked in this, well, the way that she described it, and I'll just tell you the way that she described it. She said that they sent her with a little security detail out to the middle of the American desert. She said that it was the middle of nowhere, and she never said which desert it was. I don't know if this was like maybe Area 51, or I kind of think it was probably White Sands, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But she said that they took her out there and that there was this bunker, a shack, like a concrete shack is the way she described it. And they opened this thing up, it's all locked up, and there was an elevator in this thing. It didn't go up, there was no top floor. She got in there with a couple of security guys, and she said that she thought maybe it would go down a floor or two, but it just kept on going down. And she got scared. She said that this thing actually the elevator went really quick. And she felt butterflies in her stomach was how she described it. She felt vertigo because it was going down. Well, she said that it was a mile under the desert. The doors opened up in the elevator, and she said there was a little city under the desert. She said they would get around in golf carts. There were a lot of German rocket scientists that were working there. This was, you know, post-World War II, 1950s. And she said that they had a movie theater, they had a bowling alley, they had little cafes. She talked about this one cafe that they had that had little yellow umbrellas over the table. And she laughed about it. She made a joke. She said, you know, you don't need an umbrella in a cave. But it was, you know, to make people feel comfortable. I guess that they were spending a lot of time down there. So that was a weird story, and she told me about this just like I was another grown-up, and that's why I remember it just so distinctly. And then she kind of addended the conversation by saying, oh, and by the way, UFOs are a real thing, and there are aliens, and the government knows this. They're not telling the public, but the government knows this. So I grew up with this information, 5 years old, and I mean that will make quite a mark on a kid. There we go. It probably looked something like this. I think this is an old ICBM base, but same kind of thing. Middle of nowhere, a low-slung bunker, and my mom's best friend, her name was Ellen Severson. We called her Aunt Ellen. And my mom knew her because she worked in the Rand Corporation, which was a subsidiary of Hughes at the time. They kind of became their own company in 1961. But when my mom was working there, the Rand Corporation is who I've spoken with Richard Souder, who's kind of an expert on the underground bases. And he said that the Rand Corporation worked with the Army Corps of Engineers. And they're the guys that built our underground bases. Any underground facility, that was done by Rand Corp along with the Army Corps of Engineers. There we go. So that's a little thing called a subterrane that you see in the middle there on the bottom. And more or less melts through rock, like a hot knife through butter. I doubt if this is where my mom was at, but then again, who knows? It's an underground facility, level 27, so it's pretty deep. Anyway, the reason why Howard Hughes, I think, was involved in this and with the Rand Corporation is because the way that Hughes made his fortune was not through aeronautics. It was he created a better drill bit. And if you think about it, well, that sort of opened up the oil fields, and I imagine that it also, opened up the possibility of building these deep underground bases. That's from an old Look magazine, 1955. It's very strange how, we always hear in ufology, actually, they kind of go hand in hand. The underground bases and flying saucers, UFOs. I don't like to use the word UAP either, right? It's just, officialdom trying to rebrand what we've known about for a long, long time. But they're always trying to make it seem like it's something new, and then they don't have to talk about Roswell, et cetera. But anyway, my mom, she actually said that she knew Wernher von Braun. The Disney, Wonderful World of Color would come on TV, and my mom would see Werner would be on there when they would talk about the futurist stuff, right? And he would explain the staging of rockets and all of that. And my mom would say, that's my old friend Werner. So I've learned that Wernher von Braun was stationed in White Sands, New Mexico, and that's why, and I've had other people talk about an underground base there. It was primarily a computer base. That was there back in the 1950s. So I think that that's probably where she was working. Anyway, that was just a very strange thing to grow up with. And the other thing was my mom said that we already knew that there was life out there that was not from here. Let's see. So some years went by, and I took my mom to see the movie Star Wars. And my mom just opened up when we saw that film. She said, son, you have no idea how close to the truth that movie was. That, the different beings, the different craft that you see, that's all true. She said, but they'll never tell the public this. They'll never tell the public because they're afraid of how the public is going to react. And she mentioned the War of the Worlds radio broadcast and how people were jumping out of windows, draining their bank accounts and freaking out. And she said they're afraid that that would happen, but even worse. And that's why they're never going to tell people about it. And it was one of the few times that, since I was a child, that my mom did talk about what she knew and what she had learned. Now, I should tell you guys, when I was in 4th grade, I was 10 years old, we had a show and tell day, right? I think it was a Friday during the week, and kids were talking about what their parents did. So I talked about my dad's landscaping business, and then I said, oh, and by the way, my mom, and I told my mom's story in front of a bunch of 10-year-olds. So the teacher scheduled a parent-teacher conference with my mom. Oh, God. So now I'll never forget this. I was playing in the playground, and afterwards, we got in the car. Mom was really quiet, and we're driving home. She's driving home, and she looks at me and she says, son, I'm not angry about this. You didn't know. I didn't tell you you couldn't talk about this. And she looks back at the road, and then she looks back at me, and she said, how do you remember that? You were just a baby when I told you about this. She said, people don't know about underground bases. They don't know about UFOs. They don't know about extraterrestrials. And you can't talk about this to people. And you certainly can't talk about it and bring me up. And what I told you, your mom could go to prison. Your mom would get into terrible trouble. And so, for many years, I didn't talk with her about it, but I always wondered about it. And, it's like she opened up again after seeing Star Wars after all those years. Well, anyway, so my mom, she lived up until 1999. And in the meantime, she worked as a private headhunter for different aerospace corporations. I mean, she was always on the phone talking to people from Lockheed, Rockwell. You just name Northrop was a big account that she had. And so she had her feet back in the water of this whole thing. And around that time and on, I was trying to get her to talk a little bit more, and she would get really frustrated, and she couldn't tell me anymore. But my mom passed away from cancer back in 1999. She kept getting unrelated cancers. They weren't metastasized cancers. It was as though she had been irradiated, is what the doctor told her. And I don't know if they were operating the base with a nuclear pile or what they were doing, but obviously it was 1950s. Maybe they didn't know how to protect people. But I found that is a problem for people that worked in the underground bases back in the old days, as a lot of those guys got cancer. And that was my mom. When she was on her deathbed, she kind of reiterated what she said when I was a child. She didn't tell me more, but I wanted her to go and sue somebody. It was like, it wasn't worth your life. I mean, you've had cancer 5 different times, and she passed away a week after we had this conversation. She said, "I'm proud of what I did, son. I would do it all over again. Like a soldier, there were risks, and I knew there were risks, but I was doing it for my country." And a week after that, my mom was gone. As long as my mom was alive, there was a chance that she'd give me the big golden ticket. There was a chance that she would tell me, because I still to this day, I don't really know what she was doing. I know that she was a computer expert, and we didn't have a computer at home. She learned that skill somewhere. And I found out with a case that I closed a couple of years ago, that there was a family that the sons were about my age, about 10 years old and 5 years old. And the dad actually took them in an elevator that was very similar to what my mom described. And the doors opened up, and there was this computer banks as far as the eye could see. So I think, and that was in White Sands, New Mexico. So I think that she may have been there. Also, she said that she knew Werner von Braun, and that's, I found out that that's where he was stationed. So anyway, when my mom passed away, that was the end of the chance of me finding out more from her. So that's when I became a MUFON field investigator. I figured, I started reading books about the subject. I kind of devoured them, and a lot of them contradicted each other. And I just decided the only way I'm really going to be able to follow up on my mom is to do this myself, hands on the steering wheel. So that's what I did, and it worked pretty well for me. I've been doing it, let's see here now. There we go. Didn't go to my animation. but anyhow, that's over at Alien Con. It's my friend Paul Hynek there. His father is one of my great heroes, and he's actually one of my very closest and best friends. So in the last 8 years, I've literally closed over 900 cases. I think just regular MUFON cases right now, we're up to like 930 or something. Something happened to me after I became a field investigator. We like to think that we're investigating the phenomena like a scientist would look through a microscope and there's a slide there, and somehow we're externalized from the experiment. But that's not what it is. What I've learned is that if you start poking at the phenomena, you can't be surprised if it starts poking back. The phenomena gets personal. Something very strange, a lot of strange things have happened, but this has got to be the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me. My wife and I call it our weird week. There was one night where I'd finished closing a case, a MUFON case. I was feeling pretty good about what I was doing. I'd been a field investigator for maybe 6 months at that point. And I went up to go to sleep. Now, I'd been trying the CE5 meditation thing. I didn't want to see a UFO. I wanted to meet aliens. So I was doing the meditation thing. I'd had the mantra. I had the focal point that I would look at and concentrate on. And the message that I was sending out was I want to meet you. I said, you guys, you can abduct me if you want. Don't do that. You don't want to do that. But I literally said that. I said, if you want my DNA, go ahead. But I just want to see you. I want to meet you. I want to know personally that this is real and not just my mom's story. So that night I went up, after meditating for a couple of weeks. I'd been doing it. I wasn't really expecting it to work, to tell you the truth. I really didn't think it was going to work, but I thought it was worth a try. So I went up, and Lisa, my wife, was already asleep. She was on the right-hand side of the bed, and I was on the left, and I was kind of on my elbows. I think of my mom in her little sleeping role when she had her encounter with this intelligent ball of sparks, a Foo Fighter. This is what I think it was. What happened was our room started flooding with light. Now, this light had no source. Now, you guys know how a light works. You click the light on, or you flip a switch, and the photons come out from the source. It's not like you can pour them into a room from a picture, or that they just show up somehow. But this was light with no source. We had a cricket problem in our rafters. This was an old house in Burbank. Wasn't a rural area. It was in the middle of the city. I mean, the Chandler bike path is kind of a popular place for people to walk and ride their bikes and stuff, and that was in front of our house. So you always had the sound of cars going on. You could hear the police sirens. You could hear helicopters, what have you. But it got really, really quiet. It was like a studio quiet room. Now, this is going on. The room is filling with light. It's like a bluish light. The crickets aren't there. There's no external sounds. I couldn't hear cars. I couldn't hear anything, not a whisper. It was perfectly silent. And I noticed that I couldn't move. I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't move my legs. I had pillows behind my back, and I was just kind of stationary. This was not sleep paralysis. I was not asleep. I had not gone to sleep yet, and I hadn't fallen asleep and wakened up. You know, this was an anomalous thing that was going on. But at that point, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid at all. It had this weird calming sensation to it, what was happening. Now, I've heard the term the Oz effect, and I think that that's a really good term for it, because it's sort of like when Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, when the screen becomes color, it's like this other world, and that's how great of a transformation this was. I couldn't move, there was no sound, the room's flooding with light, and I noticed, like, in front of our bed, it was as though, like a little spiral galaxy, this light was spinning. It was a sepia color, like a yellowish, tannish color. And it was still dark in front of me, but you could see this swirl. And I was perfectly calm. I wasn't asking questions. I was just, like, kind of agog with what I was looking at. And, but then what happened was it seemed like if you took a cup of coffee and you poured cream into it. This opened up from the center outwards. It was about 7 feet across. It was a perfect circle. And there was light and distance coming from this. I could see these diminutive figures that were way, like far in the background, and they started drawing up towards me. It was very dramatic when it happened. It's the strangest thing I've ever seen. They didn't walk up. It was as though they were like being pulled towards me somehow. And they were the little 4-foot-tall gray guys with the big black eyes. Sev Tok, she was speaking earlier at 3 o'clock today, and she said that it was like looking into this black pool of oil, or I forget exactly how she described it, but that was the way it was. It seemed like their eyes had this ability to control and to really put you in this trance-like state. I've heard it expressed as like a hypnagogic state, and that was really the way that it felt. I was starting to feel afraid. At this point, I was really starting to feel afraid. I was trying to communicate with them, mind to mind. I couldn't speak. They weren't speaking to me, and they weren't communicating with me. They took blood from me, and they took energy, and it felt like they were taking a lot of blood from me. And I was afraid that because I wasn't getting an answer back from them, there was no communication happening. I was afraid that I would wind up like one of those mutilated cows that they find, that are, all the blood is, exsanguinated from them. So at this point, I was really scared. They worked like a surgical team. There was 3 that were on this side. There was 1 that was on this side. And it was like everybody had a job to do. It was very efficient, I think that it took maybe 20 minutes max. I was trying to communicate with them, and then I was just scared as hell. I was praying. I was asking God to help me. They weren't demons. They weren't spirits. They weren't ghosts. You could feel their touch. It was cold. It was cold like at SeaWorld. You could pet the dolphins at one time when you were kids, And that was really what the skin felt like on me. It was just kind of cold. It was soft skin, but it was just very, very strange. And my wife was dead to the world. She wasn't waking up. She was still there next to me. So anyway, it took 20 minutes, and then they drew away the same way that they came in. They didn't turn around. They didn't walk away. They just kept on staring at me, and they pulled back through the wall. And the wall came back together. There was no longer the little portal, the 7-foot portal that was there. It was just myself, my wife. Our room was still flooded with light. It took me a good maybe 4 minutes before I could move or talk. And the first thing that I did was I just started yelling and screaming. And I was shaking my wife. And her reaction was she thought maybe I'd had a mental breakdown. She said, "You've joined this crazy UFO group. Is this the kind of thing that I have to look forward to in the future?" Oh, God. And I kind of went into a fetal position, and I didn't say anything about it. And I don't think I said anything about it to her the next day. I was embarrassed. She didn't believe me. She thought I'd had a mental collapse of some sort. Who do you go and tell? Who do you talk to? I had my state director at MUFON, but he was very nuts and bolts about the phenomena. For him, it was like cosmic air shows. He thought that perhaps there was, some of the entity reports were true, but it must be this very, very rare thing. Maybe Betty and Barney Hill and a couple of others, Travis Walton. But the last thing he wanted to hear was his new field investigator is saying that he met aliens in his bedroom, And my wife didn't believe me. 2 nights later, Lisa's the person who's shaking me. And she's shaking me awake. She was pacing by the bed, which I've never seen her do before or since, just very, very upset. And our room was flooded with light again. Crickets were silent. Couldn't hear external sounds. It was the Oz effect going on again. And what my wife said was, she said, "You need to tell your little friends they need to leave us alone." So I did not sign up for this. And, half of me, I was horrified that perhaps my wife had gone through something like I had gone through and met the same little guys. I didn't tell her what they looked like. I just told her that aliens came through the wall. I didn't say that they were tiny, but she said, "Your little friends." So that's always kind of been the cue to me that she probably saw the same guys I did. So I was relieved. At least my wife knew that I wasn't insane. 2 nights after that, we both woke up to our house flooded again with light. This was like 3 nights in 1 week. This time, it was also coming from outside of our window. So we both got up. We weren't paralyzed. We were able to get to the window. I was on the right side. Lisa was over here. And it was like God's own spotlight was shining down over our house. Now, I'm sure that the neighbors could also see it because porch lights were going on. And I wasn't going to run outside, okay, because I'd I'd read about Travis Walton. I'd read about, I didn't want that to happen to me. I had already had my experience. I didn't want another one. But anyway, Lisa and I were looking at each other, and we had this telepathic thought that came into both of our heads at the same time. And it was so absurd that we started laughing about it. It was like this thought. It wasn't our own. We heard the same thing. It wasn't in a voice, but it said, "Oh, don't worry, it's just the neighbor's porch light." So I'm looking at Lisa, she's looking at me. We had a moment there, and we said in unison, "That's no porch light." So at this point, Lisa, I was thrilled. My wife knew. I certainly know I wasn't insane. We both had this telepathic moment. You know what the hell of it is that Lisa doesn't remember anything now except for just our room flooding with light. And thank God she remembers that, because she'd probably think I was nuts. I mean, she's heard me talk about this so many times. She knows what an effect it had on me. But some people, they have, now I know, 900 some cases later, a lot of people will have their memories stripped from them. It'll be either that, or sometimes it's as though people had made an agreement that they're not going to talk about it. People will have magnificent UFO sightings, close encounters, and afterwards, it's almost like they're embarrassed to talk about it with the other witness that saw the same thing. And this is when the phenomena becomes personal. If you think that it's something external from you, guess again, it's not. So, what I think happened, though, now, after this happened, I really didn't know who to talk with, but I knew that Kathleen Martin from MUFON was kind of heading up the Experiencer Research Team, it was called then, the ERT, Experiencer Research Team. We've changed the acronym. It's still the ERT, but it's the Experiencer Resource Team, because that's more honest. That's what we do. I mean, we are the compassionate wing of MUFON. I think there was a period of time where MUFON was kind of embarrassed of the ERT. I mean, it was very kind of nuts and bolts. But I've seen MUFON open up, and now they actually feature us at the symposia. They have special events, this next coming symposia. They not only have the workshops for the experiencers, but they also have a panel. Seven Eye, and Kathleen is going to be on it with us, and Dr. George Medich, who is our boss there. And so, thank God, I mean, there is some place that you can go now. If you go to MUFON.com, you go to their frontist page, you'll see two buttons that you can click: report a UFO or report a being. And you want to go for the report a being. If what I'm telling you sounds like anything, that if it sounds familiar to you, that's what you want to do. And you'll speak with somebody who's a non-judgmental listener. And they might be able to answer some of your questions. I mean, for me, just talking with Kathleen, we met at Alien Con. She was going to be in town. I was going to be going to the event anyway, so we did lunch. And I talked with her for about an hour, and it was just pure catharsis being able to talk with somebody who wasn't questioning whether it was real. She knew it was real. Kathleen has come out as, she's an experiencer herself. This runs in families. It truly, truly does. Just like my mom, she had her experience with this Foo Fighter when she was a young girl. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, that I had the same sort of extraordinary experience. Maybe a little scarier than hers, but I don't know. I mean, it must have freaked her out. What I've noticed is that experiencers, after they have this face-to-face with beings, it changes a person. Now, you may have a benevolent experience. You may have a seemingly malevolent experience. It doesn't really matter. People are left with gifts after they've had ET contact. We notice that people will have synchronicities happen in their life. Carl Jung came up, he coined the term synchronicity. It means a meaningful coincidence. People, their intuition goes through the rafters. I'm able to connect the dots much easier, especially in my casework with UFOs. It just seemed to really change me. It made me more spiritual. The beings that I met were very they were very, very quiet, reticent is not the right word for it. I mean, they didn't have any communication with me at all. But since that happened, I feel like I've had contact. But it's been like teachable moments. I saw a UFO that was over by Lake Cachuma. A friend of ours was driving us to Solvang area. We were going to go, wine tasting and stuff for the day. And she was driving us, and she said, well, how do you investigate something that doesn't exist, Earl? And while she's saying this and kind of giving me guff for being a UFO investigator, I'm seeing a UFO. And this thing was it looked like a parabolic antenna. It was filigreed, it was chrome. It looked like an art object. I mean, it was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And it was the size of at least a city block. And you better believe after, I'm like Googling, 100, 200, 300 foot long parasail that's chrome. There's no such thing. I mean, this was an anomalous object. The person driving the car did not see this object. I did. About 4 years after that, I worked as a nurse. I recently retired about 3 years ago. And I was driving to work, though. I was still working as a nurse. It was a daytime sighting again. It was about 6:30 in the morning. And I drove past this school called the Ivy Academy in Northridge, California. Well, I'm driving towards this, and I see what looks like what you see up on the screen here. Although this isn't my drawing. This was another gentleman had seen a UFO that looked almost exactly the same as the one that I saw. Well, I saw it was maybe 2 blocks away. And the closer that I got to it, I'm thinking, okay, this has got to be students pulling some kind of a hoax. I'm looking for tethers, because it was massive tonnage. It was hanging in the air. It looked like somebody had constructed a V out of shipping containers, is what it looked like. Kind of a brown, dull color. It wasn't shiny or a beautiful UFO like people will sometimes see. This, leave it to me to see an interstellar garbage scow, right? Well, something weird happened. I'm going to use that word a lot. Very, very weird, because the closer I got to this thing, the less in control of my cognition I was. Now, I'm trained. I'm a trained observer. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. If you see a UFO, you're going to stop your car. You're going to take photographs. You're going to take video after you take the photographs. You take the photos so that you have the EXIF data that you'd get on a photo. You have the coordinates, you have the hour, you have the day, and you can see that whether somebody put it through Photoshop or something. That all shows up in the EXIF data on a digital photo. Well, I didn't take photos. I didn't take video. I didn't even stop my car. Sounds outside of my car, again, were very, very quiet. And you remember we were talking about this earlier, how the Oz effect works. It's just this quietude. And but this was happening again, but now I was driving my car, right? I'm driving my car, I'm seeing a UFO, I'm experiencing the Oz effect, and the closer I got to it, the most important thing in the world was that I was going to be late to work, and I needed to race past that miracle so I wouldn't be late to work. And I really didn't like that job. I mean, I was looking for excuses to quit, But I drove past this miracle. I was maybe 35 feet away from it when this thing shifted. I mean, it changed shape. It became foreshortened, kind of fattened looking. And then it was like the size of a football field, and it was a mile away. And this is impossible. I mean, physics doesn't work like that. Physical objects don't work like that. But I was seeing this with my own eyes. And But I drive right past it. I was maybe a mile away from the 118 freeway when I came to my senses. And that's when I stopped my car. I'm like face palming, my face is in my hands. And of course, the object was no longer there. It's too late for photos, videos, etc. I was ready to fire myself from MUFON. At this point, I was assistant state director, and I felt like, I don't even understand what happened there, but I botched this worse than anybody could have possibly done. And how did that happen? I went to work and I did my thing. But what I realized was it was a teachable moment, and I've had quite a few teachable moments. I mean, it wasn't just an air show for Earl, show off this high technology that they have. It was to teach me something about UFOs and their property, that what you see isn't necessarily what's there. And what you see, you may think you understand what it is or how it operates. We don't. We don't know. It's so beyond us there's really, we can try to understand it, and I'm a scientific person, but in the end, I think that this is just so much bigger than us that it's like handing a mainframe computer over to Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, he wouldn't know what he was looking at. He wouldn't know what to do with it. He was a brilliant scientist and a brilliant thinker, but it's beyond his comprehension. This is a little cartoon. Jean-Pierre Petit, we had dinner together, and he likes to do little doodles. He's a French scientist, also a ufologist, friend of Jacques Vallée's. And so he drew this, the little E.T. and the scientist asking him, "Do you believe in God?" Again, if you poke at the universe, don't be surprised if it pokes back. I'm going to race through some of these slides, or I'm going to have you here for a long time. But when I spoke with Kathleen, I'm sorry, I'm kind of like all over the place with my story, but anyway, we'll get there. When I spoke with Kathleen, after talking with her for about an hour, I said, Kathy, maybe I should join the ERT. Could I possibly be interviewed? How do you guys join the ERT? And Kathy looks at me and is like, well, what do you think we've been doing the last hour? Welcome to the ERT, Earl. This was your interview. I would expect that you would be, working with us. And experiencer cases, they run the gamut. I mean, some people will meet the tall whites, and it's like angelic beings. They feel this great sense of love. Other people have these horrifying experiences. I personally believe that we're being visited by a multiplicity of various non-human entities. I think they have varying agendas. I don't think they're all good. I don't think they're all bad. I don't think they're angels. I don't think they're demons. I think a lot of them are like us, but they're more advanced. They obviously got past the rough patch that we're in right now. I don't think that they're fighting physical wars with each other anymore. They didn't destroy themselves. And I think that they're very, very concerned about us. And so I'm going to go into a few of my better cases here. And a lot of these are experiencer cases. That is my forte. That's where my heart is with this. Again, I don't think that the aliens are here to do air shows for us, show off their technology, or play cat and mouse with the pilots. I think that it's a personal thing, that they're trying to transform us as humans. And sometimes the best way to transform somebody is to scare them. Yeah, I mean, it shocked me. It stopped me in my tracks, and it changed my life. And I feel like, that the teachable moments that I've had have been absolutely benevolent. It's been like having a spiritual teacher. So this is one case that I had that was, it was Vincenti Lighthouse in Palos Verdes, Southern California. This guy worked in the movie industry, and he was driving home after a long day. He was a writer, and he saw this greenish light in the distance. He said that he thought that perhaps they were filming a movie over by the lighthouse. So he was driving his car along this sort of windy serpentine road that's there. by the shore. And he was following, trying to figure out where this light was coming from. Well, he went around the bend, and this is what he saw. He said that this thing was about 20 feet off of the surface of the ocean, that underneath it was bubbling, like the water was boiling or something underneath it, emanating this green light. He pulled his car over, and he was just standing behind his car. He was watching it from a distance. He said that he watched as a man and a woman and a small child walked this footpath that goes down, leads to the little beach that's there. They're walking directly towards this green light and this UFO that was there. The guy was sitting there, he's watching it, and he said that he finally, he wanted to shout, he wanted to help. He thought maybe they were, like zombified. They weren't under their own, cognizance or something, and he wanted to stop them. But he felt afraid, so he got back in his car. He drove away, and he put in a report to MUFON. It was a few years after. And he said, the reason why I'm reporting this is because I feel guilty. I feel like maybe I could have done something. And I told him, I said, well, what do you think you could have done? I mean, it sounds almost like they wanted to go on, meet whoever was flying this object. Now, I spoke with this guy multiple times. He had all the emotion and just very upset, but he said that finally being able to tell his story, he felt this great sense of catharsis. And I told him, I don't think that there's anything that you could have done, and I think that you did the right thing. This case, and I will mention the man's name because he allows me to use his name. Usually I'll come up with a pseudonym for experiencers because there can be a lot of ridicule. People will lose their jobs over it. It's one thing saying that you're a UFO investigator. It's another thing saying that you've been abducted. Jeff and his family, they had a newborn baby. He was 1 month old. It was to the day that the baby was born. And they decided to drive the child out to Bakersfield with his other 2 sons. It was his wife, himself, and his 3 sons. They're going to go so that the family could meet the kid. They were out near Edwards Air Force Base, driving towards Bakersfield. This is his illustration. The guy's a character, okay? It is his ex-wife now. This upset her. She wanted to blame it on the devil, first of all. She said it wasn't aliens, it was the devil. It was the devil lying to us. But what he said was that he stopped to use nature's bathroom. And he was out there using nature's bathroom, taking a pee on a rock, more or less. And the stars seemed extremely bright. Well, he watched as a group of stars made a perfect ring in the sky over him, which stars don't do. All right. And then he said that he watched them fall. It was almost like it was raining UFOs, which is Kevin Day, he describes the Tic Tac incident. They were seeing like 130 different UFOs. Like it was raining UFOs from the sky. That's what Jeff described, the same kind of thing, that these stars, they came down to ground level, and then they started rushing towards him. He said that he didn't even have time to be afraid. He turned to his wife, and his wife was no longer next to him. She was behind the car. He said that it was not in her voice that she spoke with him and said, "Don't worry, they're not going to harm us." While all this was going on and these things were racing towards him, he said that there was this red ball of light that was moving in the scrub grass that was nearby him. And he said that it was almost like playing with a cat with a laser pointer is what was going on. They were trying to direct his attention somewhere else. So he's watching this sphere of light, an orb, if you will. We're playing around in the scrub grass, when all of a sudden he said it was like a freight train going past. He saw a flying saucer. Not a UAP, it was a flying saucer. He said it was as though it was straight out of a 1950s movie, But it was unmarked. There were no windows. I don't think there was even a dome. It was just perfectly like a big chromed frisbee is one of the ways he described it. But he said that it was like a train going by, and he could feel the wind, and it was just powerful. It was extraordinary power. He watched this shoot off into the distance, and the next thing that he remembers is it's 8 hours later. He and his wife were leaning up against the bumper of their station wagon. The three boys were exactly where they had left them. They were asleep. They were asleep. Baby was fine, was in the car seat, but asleep. Family was very worried about them because they were supposed to show up that night, and of course they didn't. It was the morning. This is a map that Jeff drew of the area where this happened. Now this guy, he had the one experience. Sometimes that's what happens. Some people will have repeated experiences. Others, it'll be like a one-off, and with him, it was a one-off. This is another case that I had. Now this normally would have gone to Northern California MUFON, but I got it because it was an ERT case, and they didn't have a member. Northern California didn't have an ERT member, so I kind of get the Northern California cases as well. This was back in 1993. The main witness is an adult now. She's probably in her late 30s, early 40s. She's an artist. This is her depiction of what she saw. When this happened, she was 10 years old. They were having a family barbecue. It was in the evening. It was her mom's best friend. They were nurses, her mom and her mom's best friend. And her mom saw this light. It was over the mountains where they were at. She points at it, and she said, "What's that?" She points at it, and the next thing you know, this object is hanging right over them. The main witness, she was only 10 years old. She said that her mom and her mom's best friend were like statues. They were just standing there. Her mom was still pointing up towards where she was pointing, where she saw this thing originally. She's tugging on her mom's pant leg, there's no response. Tugging on her mom's friend's pant leg, no response at all. This saucer was hanging right over them. It was emitting a large amount of light, and she ran into the house. She was scared. Her mom and her mom's best friend were still out there. She said that she got into the house, that her little, there we go. Now my notes aren't working on here. But the mom noticed the bright object in the sky. She pointed at it, and I'm ahead of my notes again. But anyway, that's the way that it happened. They were both paralyzed again. So she ran into the house to, hold on one second here. She ran into the house, and she found her little nephew. He was a couple of years younger than her. He was huddled in a corner. He was very scared. Her uncle and her uncle's best friend, she couldn't find them. Apparently, they had had a previous experience with entities, though. She put her arms around her little cousin. It was her cousin is who it was. And the house, again, flooded with light. And the next thing she knows, it's the next morning. She is in bed. She didn't even know how she got there. Here we go. Next morning, she wakes up in bed, is not sure how she got there. This is a timeline of all the experiences that she's had. She's had plenty of experiences over the years. For her, this was just kind of an introduction to like a series of, and a lot of times meaningful for her. This is somebody who's very spiritual now. She doesn't feel like these are evil entities or that, something bad is happening to her. It changed her life, and it was just an extraordinary change. So this is just a UFO sighting that was out in the Topanga Canyon area. Now, this guy, I spoke with him, and I spoke with the two other witnesses. It was in the evening, they'd gone to see a movie, and they decided to go out to this place in Topanga Canyon to get drinks, dinner, and dance. So they were going across the street, and this is not where you really want to stand in the middle of the street. Cars kind of race through there and stuff. But they were halfway across the street when they see these 3 oval-shaped UFOs. So they were sort of like what my mom saw. They seemed to be made out of plasma or electricity. And 3 of them shot right in front of them. They were hanging there. And each one was the size of a Mack truck. And they were hanging there, evading gravity, making no sound whatsoever, just ominously hanging there. And they were standing there in the middle of the road. The one that was in front of his friend shot off towards the ocean. The one that was in front of him shot off towards the ocean. The one that was in front of their female friend disappeared. She said that it disappeared like a soap bubble would pop, and you could smell ozone in the air. This is another case I had, a large flying superstructure. The guy was an aerospace engineer. You find a lot of aerospace engineers, military and such, will see UFOs. They'll have experiences. These guys, they were over by Lake Silverwood, which is up near Big Bear. They were just kind of hanging out, and they saw this thing approach. It was approaching from the distance. Started as just like a point of light, got closer and closer. When it got right up to where they were, his friend turned off the truck because he had heard that it could actually ruin a car's engine if you're close to a UFO. So, but again, they were sitting there on the front bumper watching this thing coming towards them. He said that it seemed like it had 4 different decks to it, and you could see beings going up and down like an aircraft carrier. And it went and shot over them, and again was heading towards the ocean and disappeared. But an aerospace engineer, we get a lot of those. This is another guy who worked near Lockheed, the Skunk Works Plant 42, which is out in Palmdale Desert. He had worked late. He wasn't working for Lockheed, but one of their competitors. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. And Cheryl Costa, who you'll hear tomorrow, we were talking about this, where a lot of the black triangles seem to be seen like 3 a.m. I kind of wonder if maybe those are some of our UFOs, because I think that, it's been 70-some years since Roswell. I'd hope that at least we've made some success with reverse engineering in that period of time. But this guy was driving home way, way late, 3 in the morning. He sees the stars blotted out in front of him, stops his car, gets out of the car, and he sees just a huge black triangle that went directly over him. Went over to where the Skunk Works, where their gate is. They have a fence and a wall. And he said that he watched this thing land like a feather behind Lockheed Skunk Works gate. And he asked me, he said, "Do you have any idea how I might be able to work on that program?" I told him, so my mom might have known, but I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to get you onto that program if it is indeed ours. The triangles, are they ours or theirs? I think maybe both. People report some that are a mile across. I don't know that we're building stuff like that. But the other superstructure the guy saw near Lake Silverwood, similarly, it looks like almost like human design, but just, maybe it's us from the future. That's one idea about UFOs, that perhaps they're time-traveling humans coming back, historians and such. And maybe that's what he saw. Now, this triangle here was seen back in 1975, and it was 2 brothers. They were arguing over an old school squirt gun. It wasn't one of the super soakers, but this was just like a silly squirt gun that you'd buy at the 5 and dime. They were on the back hood of the car, or the bonnet of the car, and they look up, and this kind of boxy-looking triangle, it wasn't black, it was gray-colored, it flew right over them, directly over. This had a window on the side. They could see people or beings behind that window. This was very low to the ground. And I spoke with both brothers, and the mother was there, and she saw this too. Now the mom is in her late 80s, and she was going, "Oh, my son was telling you about the UFO that we saw." Indeed they did. It's one of our black triangles. Here's another one that was seen in Bakersfield, California by a retired police officer. He was outside taking his dogs out to do their business. Again, it was about 1 or 2 in the morning. I believe it was late at night. And he sees this black triangle, not lit up, hanging like 30 feet over his neighbor's house. Neighbor and they happen to live at the end of the Bakersfield airport that they have there. It's the flight path. He said that he was close enough that he could see indentations in the side of this thing, and he said that it looked like the hydraulics that you see in an aircraft carrier is what he was looking at. Sounds like human design to me. I don't know. But this one I do not think was us. Okay, this was MUFON Case of the Year, actually, 2 years ago. I spoke about this one at the Symposium. A mother and her son. The mom is a clinical psychologist. The son is 19 years old at the time this happened. Dad's a medical doctor. She was coming back from the store with her son, and they saw this craft, this V-shaped craft that was hanging over a school. I mean, now I love synchronicities, I love coincidences, and I love seeing patterns. Here we go again. It's another grade school. It was a V-shaped craft, and we have a lot of sightings of those in Southern California, probably here too, I imagine. They're kind of like, you used to just see flying saucers, now we see the triangles and we see the V-shaped things. Well, she said that the closer that they got to this craft, that time became weird, that sounds outside of their car became muffled, and that they weren't talking about what they were seeing. Now, this was her adult son, and this woman and her husband actually have a mental health radio show that they do together. So, I mean, I can't tell you the names of people here because it could ruin their career. There's a ridicule factor out there still. But anyway, this V, it turned, she said that it was intentional, she believed, that it turned so that they could see the lights. And the lights were flashing. They were blue and white. She said that it seemed to put them into a hypnotic state. Sound familiar? The sounds became muffled. I mean, they were experiencing the Oz effect. Jenny Randall from the UK, UFO researcher, came up with the term the Oz effect. So it rolled so they could see the lights, seemed to do something to them mentally. It put them into this hypnotic state, and that rolled back to the position that it originally was in. She said it turned around, and this thing, it just sailed off like nobody's business, like just a little above rooftop level. And they just watched it go until it was in the vanishing point. Well, she and her son, she drove her son home, and they didn't talk about what they'd seen. Again, it was almost like they had come up to it, like they weren't supposed to talk about it, or they had come up with an agreement among themselves, or whoever. They're not talking about this miracle that they just drove past and saw. Now, the son broke the silence, and he said, "Well, what was that we saw, Mom? What was that?" And that's when she said, "Well, what do you think it was?" It was a UFO that we saw. But that's not the end of the story. The mom came home, and she started having visits. They would happen late at night, usually. It was the little gray guys at first, but there was also a mantis-like being. What happened, I spoke with her and her husband, who's an MD. These are the guys that run the mental health wellness program, and they have the radio show about this. He said that he would be paralyzed so he couldn't move, and his wife would be taken. And when they would return her, they would find her in different rooms in the house. They found her in the kitchen once, just sitting in there. She had, I'll show you, she had a couple of marks, puncture marks on the back of her neck. She had her husband take that photo. That was after this happened. This was a repetitive thing. She kept meeting them. She felt that they were benevolent in the end. She felt they'd taken her DNA for some reason. And Sev talked about that earlier, that there is a hybridization program that's been going on for a long, long time. So perhaps it was part of that. But again, we have these same patterns. The Oz effect, they see the light. It causes some hypnotic state to happen in the person, but it is physical. It's not ghosts. It's not demons. You know, this is high technology. It's advanced beings like ourselves. This is another case, Calamasa, California, 1975. It's Christmas Eve. A family, a mom and her 3 sons. Keep on having these patterns. The 3 sons, the mom, the dad. But anyway, this time it was the mom and her 3 sons. They're coming back from a Christmas party, and they were stopped at a red light. The eldest son was sitting in the front seat with the mom, and he points up at a very, very bright star. He says, "Mom, what's that?" There were 3 stars that were up there, but the one was really, really bright. As soon as he pointed to it, this thing came down. And she said that it was the most beautiful thing that she had ever seen. She said it was this creamy white, but it had all these swirling colors. And the lights were going. And she said it was so beautiful, I couldn't take my eyes off of it. And I talked with all 3 sons. They're all adults now. The mom's still with us. She's in her 80s. But she loved talking about it. I mean, this was this extraordinary experience. She said that they sat there and she was not sure if it was like a couple of minutes or a half an hour. Time lost all meaning to her. She said the sounds outside of the car you could not hear. No external street sounds. There was a guy who was at the crosswalk and he had his leg extended, and she noticed that he wasn't moving. I mean, you can't really, I mean, you try that. I certainly can't, you know, not with my pogo stick here. Well, this guy was just standing on one foot with a leg extended. He was walking across the street, and he was not moving. He was like a statue. Are you guys seeing some patterns here in these cases? So she said that she was not sure that's the guy. My students, it's an art school, is where I teach my class at. So a lot of their assignments will actually do artwork, which is wonderful. And I'll ask them if I can use it in my presentations. But anyway, so what wound up happening was that the mom started getting worried. She said it was so beautiful she couldn't take her eyes off the object. But she said that she was worried that the light was going to turn green and that they would be sitting there still. She would be jaw dropped looking at this beautiful thing, and somebody would hit their car, something would happen. She started worrying about her boys. So as soon as she thought that, the light turned green. When the light turned green, the flying saucer shot back up to where she originally saw it when the sun pointed it out to her. Now they noticed that it was actually 3 similar objects. It was 3 flying saucers, all 3 together. And they all sat there for a couple of seconds, and then they shot off together in tandem. And they experienced the Oz effect. It was all the same stuff that you experience as an experiencer, if you've been abducted or visited. And strangely, you know, I think that having a close encounter with a craft or having a close encounter with entities, people will experience the same stuff. And the Oz effect is one of those. The phenomena is personal, it's interactive. It can be generational too, as it was with myself and my mom. These boys and their mother, you know, there was military background in the family. It wasn't the first UFO seen by these people. We're not just observers of the phenomena, and we aren't on the outside looking in, staring at something separate from ourselves, like, again, the microscope slide. Rather, we share the microscope slide with the phenomenon. And there always seems to be something that initiates contact. People will point out, what is that? They'll point out, they'll see a UFO in the distance, or they'll see the lights of a UFO, and suddenly it's right over them. It seems to trigger something. It's like this interaction where you see something, you point it out, and it comes down to you. And I think that somehow they make our space into their space. I mean, when Lisa and I had our weird week, when I had my own experience, it felt like they had taken the physics of Earth, the things that we usually experience here, and they were replaced with their physics. Now, I don't know if they created a little pocket universe that allowed all this stuff to happen. Again, there was that perfect silence. Time seemed weird and wonky and slow. It happened again when I had my sighting in my car. It was the exact same feeling, the same exact experience. But I think that what they do is that they somehow or another, they make your space into their space. And stuff that's impossible to us, well, it's possible to them. And perhaps our visitors' greatest motive is to retool humanity's sense of reality. We live in this way where, it's like, okay, I believe this because I can knock on it, I can hear it and feel it. But, this is constructed of mostly vacuum. I mean, most of what we experience, there's vacuum and then you'll have an atom. And it's mostly vacuum. I mean, this is just the way that the universe is. And I think that, we hear words like paranormal, but I don't think it's para anything. I think that what we need to do is expand our idea of what normal is. And I think that that's one of the main motives of our visitors and what they're trying to teach us. And perhaps it's the next step in human evolution. I think that we're to the point now where we are on the edge of becoming humans that are actually living in space. I mean, it is actually going to be the space age. We're talking about moving to Mars and all this stuff that we're planning. But, we have that nuclear threat that's out there. Experiencers are told 4 different things. It doesn't matter what case it is, everybody is left with these 4 things. War is wrong. Nuclear weapons are going to destroy you. You need to dismantle them. Stop treating the world like your personal garbage dump. And you need to elevate yourself. You need to raise your vibration. And it doesn't matter what background the person is. It doesn't matter what their political party is. It doesn't matter what religion they adhere to. It's always the same messages. And that's what we're being told. And I think that they're getting us ready to, I think that our entities want Star Trek. They don't want Star Wars. And if we go out the way we are now, it's going to be Star Wars, and that's not what they want. So, but anyway, you guys, that's the end of my presentation for you. And thank you so much. Thank you so very, very much. Again, if any of this sounds familiar to you, you can go to MUFON.com and just, you can report your UFO there, and somebody like myself or one of my team members will treat you with respect, and they'll listen to you, and we want you to report your UFOs. But if you've had an experience with entities and any of this sounds familiar, click on the button that says report a being. And someone like myself, a non-judgmental listener, will listen, and it would change your life. It changed mine, certainly. So thank you so much.